Good evening, and thank you all for being here. Thanks to the Sable Inn for making this a reality. And as you know, and as I have said many times before, I do my absolute best to be as accountable to you all as I can, meaning I'm back home listening, taking your input, and sharing also what's going on, the concerns, the frustrations, the good things, the bad things, and everything in between. And there's a lot that happens in St. Paul. We have covered in this room a lot of the different subjects that happened last year, which set the stage for this year. So I will briefly kind of cover a general synopsis of what's been happening during this legislative session, and then I'll take your questions, comments, concerns, and kind of go from there. So that's kind of the general format here. We don't have to be overly formal. We can be very informal as to what's going on. Anyways, so with that, thank you also to the local electeds joining us tonight. I always appreciate seeing you both. So legislative session. So we entered this legislative session February 12th, and at the beginning of this legislative session, the budget outlook for the state, after Democrats had completely spent the $20 billion budget surplus from last year and raised taxes by $10 billion, left a couple $1 billion on the bottom line that could be spent right now, but could also result in the next biennium, so just next year, with us having a budget deficit because they overspent. And so the concern and the topic has been, let's make sure that any spending that exists or that comes about this year, one, that it only be one-time spending, because there's no money. There's no money into the future, to be really frank. Like if we continue on the current trajectory, if we don't cut spending, come on in, you're welcome. There's coffee too if you'd like. As we look, if any additional amount of spending happens this year, will only deepen the budget deficit that we'll have next year for legislators to deal with. We will see the impacts of that $10 billion worth of tax increases and whether or not that's going to positively or negatively impact the budget outlook in this coming year. So with that in mind, the session started relatively slowly on major topics. The two top things that happened early on in session were there was a tax bill passed and signed into law that helped with people's standard deduction on their income taxes, and it's frequent that happens. It's a very natural thing for the legislature to take up ahead of any tax filing, to make sure that we're in conformity with the federal tax code, and so that people aren't seeing additional increases in their taxes from the standard deduction. And so that passed on a very bipartisan vote earlier this session. And then one of the topics that has been talked about both here locally and across the state was the concern with the statute related to the school resource officer issue. And every different school district has dealt with that differently. While there was ambiguity, the concern really started as the school year started last fall, and schools were, or I should say, local law enforcement entities were pulling their school resource officers because of the liability and the risk involved there. And I want to just restate this, every community is different. So the way that Sauk Rapids Rice deals with that issue compared to Foley, compared to Royalton, compared to Piers, is all different. Every situation is different, but the concern was it was creating so much liability for the police officers to be in the school that frankly it wasn't a working relationship that was positive. And so we had to fix that language, and that did pass earlier this session, and so schools have been able to get their school resource officers back in school if they didn't have them because of the additional level of clarity. Now that shouldn't have even been an issue, but that stemmed from the death of George Floyd and the sort of holds that law enforcement officers are trained in. So those are two things early in session. But as the details have come about, as we've watched the legislative session unfold, some very concerning provisions have been moving forward that fly in the face of the values that I believe our community shares. And I'll just mention from the top, and one of the things that I highlight in the handout is they continue to go after our Second Amendment rights. Two different pieces of gun control legislation were passed last year. Those two things in 2023 that passed were universal background checks and red flag laws, two things that I voted against. And I'm not going to get into those two, but to focus more on what they're trying to do this year. So following one of the shootings that happened last year, President Biden and Kamala Harris, they pushed forward a proposal for safe storage legislation, and they drafted this draft of legislation that they wanted states to take action on. And sure enough, Democrats in St. Paul said, let's pick that up and let's charge forward. And this safe storage legislation I've been seeking to shine a lot of light to and bring our citizens in our community up to speed on the impacts to what this bill would do, and also ask folks in our community to reach out to other area legislators and to share their concern with this legislation. So the safe storage legislation essentially restricts and mandates the way that you have to store your firearm and your ammunition in your own home. And I grew up between Upsall and Swanville, and on our family dairy farm, we had a gun that was loaded behind the barn door to keep the varmints away, right? And this bill would create a situation where a farmer in that situation would carry the responsibility, the liability, and ultimately the criminal penalty if a law enforcement officer were to come into the barn and find your gun loaded, ready to take on the varmint. Which metro legislators have laughed at that suggestion when it's been brought up by rural legislators. But that's real life. We all know that that's real life. But let's talk about it more through the lens of the impact that it has on our homes and on our families. Okay? So, this isn't necessarily the specific circumstance in Foley. You have a great law enforcement right here local. But I live between Upsall and Swanville, and it's 30 minutes for any local law enforcement entity to respond to a crisis at my home. And let's just use, for example, that a violent intruder enters my home. And by this bill that Democrats are pushing forward, my loaded gun would need to be inside of a locked safe. Or the gun could be unloaded, but still locked and separated from the ammunition. But the simple matter of the fact is, if there's a violent intruder that enters your home is less safe, and you are going to, that is going to mean that you have an extended amount of time that it takes you to respond to that violent intruder. And so I oppose that piece of legislation because in rural communities that makes our homes less safe. And frankly, it doesn't matter, even if you're in the city of Foley. If you're in the city of Foley and you have a violent intruder, you need to be able to protect yourself and your family. And this piece of legislation would limit that. When I was in Royalton, people were like, well, how would they enforce that? How would they enforce this? Is the sheriff going to be coming into my home to check to make sure that my gun is properly stored? No, they're not. But here's what could happen. So Scott's home is robbed. Someone steals his big flat screen TV, and Scott calls it in and asks the sheriff to come out and visit. And the sheriff comes in, investigates the situation, checks around the house to see what else may have been stolen, and he identifies, oh, your gun is loaded and it's not in a locked facility. Well, now you're the criminal. Now you Exactly. And so, we can share a laugh and jest about this, but that's not the way of reality in Minnesota. That's not the way this sort of legislation makes our homes less safe. And beyond infringing upon the Second Amendment, it's what it would do to impact the safety in our own homes. So that's a big concern, and just last week, the Speaker of the House said, we are absolutely moving forward with that piece of legislation. We are going to try and pass it. We're going to try and jam it through. That was her position literally on Thursday. So, of course, I'm very concerned about the direction there. There have been attempts this session to take away access to public land, which I think is important for many outdoorsmen, fishermen, hunters. There have been attempts to transfer the land of the state forest within the White Earth Reservation back to the White Earth Band. There have been attempts to take away the state forest surrounding Upper Red Lake and to turn that back over to the Red Lake Nation. There have been attempts to take land right adjoining Lake Mille Lacs and hand it to the Mille Lacs Band. And all of these are attempts because last year, the Upper Sioux State Park was turned back over to the Upper Sioux Indian community. And people, and sportsmen especially, are very frustrated by those bills. And I think that if we generally as a state continue down our current direction, those bills will pass. They're not going to pass this year. They're not going to pass this year. But it's a big concern to us that that is the general direction that the Democratic Party wants to take us in Minnesota, where they're trying to give land back to the 11 Native American tribes in Minnesota. So that has been something that has been a big topic of conversation at the legislature. And then we can go on down into the little things. Jeff and I have talked about some of these things when he came to visit at the Capitol. One thing that isn't going to happen this session, but was brought forward, was an idea of adding an additional fee and tax on broadband provided in every local municipality, where a township or a city government or a county government could decide to raise a fee on the broadband provided in any given community, and then take that for their city budget, their township budget, and whatnot. And especially after seeing $10 billion worth of new taxes, I just can't stand that idea. And it would have been approximately, based upon just the projection, it would have been $7 or $8 a month for every one of us, you know, to the tune, and now I'm not going to get my math right, but I mean, just multiply that out, over $50 a year additional that you'd be paying. Just, and frankly, you'd be getting nothing for that, right? It's just so, fortunately, that literally came out of the bills that they were pushing forward last week, so that was some good news. And then, for those of you who have followed the legislature for a long time, you'll know that the main budget year is the odd year. So last year, so 2023 is when they set the state budget, and our state budget went from $53 billion approximately to $73 billion, a massive increase in spending. And then when we look at the even year, so this year is seen as a policy year, a year to look at the way that we're executing through our state agencies, our policies as it relates to how we manage wolves, or how we the rights of Second Amendment, the rights with the Second Amendment, or policy as it relates to human services. That's what the even year is seen as, more of a policy year, and then in addition, a conversation around bonding, around local infrastructure projects for roads and bridges, wastewater, drinking water systems, and otherwise, where a lot of attention is typically given to that topic. So far this year, bonding has really been on the back burner. Like, it has not received a lot of the attention so far this year. Though as we near the end of session, as we near May 20th is the date of the end of session, that will be one of the premier pieces of conversation. The state doesn't have a large capacity to enhance the amount of bonding that we've done. Frankly, with the current budget, frankly, the maximum amount that we would be able to do in bonding would be $950 million. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but when you spread that out to a whole bunch of local projects, and if Foley's getting 7 and Gilman's getting 5, and, it adds up. And that's all that I'm trying to say. And the bonding is typically done to manage state assets. So the state obviously owns a ton of buildings across the state where state agencies are, where the MnDOT office is, or the MnSCU system as a whole, or the University of Minnesota are all state assets. And so the maintenance and management of those state assets is done largely through bonding. But like I said, that has not garnered a big amount of attention yet, but usually bonding bills come together in the very last week of a legislative session. And again, that end of the session is May 20th of this year. So the only other majorly concerning social or political issue that I want to make mention for you all is they are seeking this year to mandate that you and I, through our insurance that we pay for our health insurance, that we would be mandated to also, so insurance would be mandated to cover gender affirming care, transgender surgeries, people transitioning from being a man to a woman to a man, whatever, and that the cost of that would be passed on to all of us as insurance enrollees. That would be seen in our in what we pay in our premiums every year. So those are some of the key issues that are on the table right now at the legislature. The stuff related to public access of land, I really don't think those things are moving forward this year. Another piece of good news in my eyes is there has been an attempt by the Democrats to have basically a public option for health insurance, which could collapse the individual insurance marketplace over time and bring about socialized health care. Fortunately, they don't have the money to pay for that, and so they have had to back away from that policy proposal.
Now, I understand the India thing. The cannabis thing, where we're going to have cannabis and sell, but I already see the Indians are way ahead of us. They already have dispensaries, right? The Indian.
Well, so they set up, so good question. So so everybody understands, on the law legalizing the use of adult use cannabis, they set it up so that any non-Native American in the state literally was held back from licensing to be able to provide these things in Minnesota, so that the Native Americans would have the first access to it.
And of course they were going to fight drug addiction by selling drugs and collect taxes. Are the Indians, the tribals, are they paying the same tax as a regular? And that's where they're headed. I see them relax. They're not going to sell it. They're just going to grow it and sell it to the other Indians at a lesser price than it was. They're getting ahead of us. Can we stop this? No. Can
I stop that? No. But again, if this comes back to what happens in the Senate, you want to stop that from happening? Like the changes that they're going to try and make to the marijuana law, that can stop too.
I'm not blaming the Indians. They have great lawyers. They have great people from Las Vegas that are leading them, and they're ahead of us for some reason.
I love how you don't blame them. Sometimes it becomes really frustrating when they're opposing the things that make our economy turn.
Has there been any movement on the ambulance funding?
Good question. No significant movement. This is a priority of members of the House Republican Caucus, and because we represent a lot of the rural parts of the state. And so far, my first understanding, and Jeff, you and I have talked about this, but my understanding is the total need is it like 160 million or 100?
It was 120.
120 million, thank you. $120 million, and the governor's supplemental budget had $12 million, so like a tenth. And really, there hasn't been significant movement on that topic since you and I saw one another last. So my colleagues other House Republicans had a press conference to this effect last week. But this is just another instance of misplaced priorities, right? As an example, one of the ways that they spend money with this budget is for medical assistance or free health care for people who are here illegally. The price tag on that is nearly $200 million. So instead of rural ambulance funding or any other priority, that's where their priority is. So it's kind of like we're gonna have to peel back the onion on a lot of this stuff and refocus the priorities.
That, just for clarification, the 120 million, when we went down and talked to the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, the 120 million was an immediate influx of what local ambulances needed. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, the next year, we were going to talk about putting it into the bonding year for a permanent budget.
Yeah, we need something for a permanent fix to this issue. This issue needs a long-term solution, and right now we're not close to that long-term solution. It needs its own funding mechanism for the future, because otherwise rural communities are going to have fewer and fewer ambulance options or just availability in general. So, and remind me, how is that? Can you bring Jeff? Can you help us? How does that impact the full year?
Well, I think we're okay because a lot of our ambulances are coming out of St. Cloud, mail for one. But I would say around, I'd say Morrison County would definitely affect people in rural
I
areas.
appreciate that you're caring about Morrison County. No, the fact of the matter, I'm glad to hear that Foley is well taken care of. The surprising part to me has been, outside of Jeff and others who came that day, I really didn't hear a lot from rural EMS folks concerned about this issue until I returned back to the legislature. By comparison, my colleagues who work in or from the far western part of the state near the Dakota border, it's been a far larger issue. They're even more rural, right? Less densely populated communities. It's been a much larger issue for them there and on the Iron Range than it has been for us here in central Minnesota.
But I look at it though, seconds count, no matter what. And it was in Foley, we did toy with the notion, this was years ago, that by bringing our police department out of City Hall to give them a little bit bigger space, we would be looking at possibly getting an ambulance service to offset the cost of leasing a building or building a building to have the ambulance service right here too. It didn't go anywhere, it was just talking about it, but at least that is, it could work. I mean, especially in our area as we're growing. And having, not to say there's nothing wrong with our fire and rescue, because they're awesome, but it's just another tool, I guess you can put in the toolbox to, when seconds count. You're still minutes away, so.
How about school funding? We're short 1.2 million or something, and I believe the board will pass what is it? Well, their reduction, but they can increase the levy without a voter thing. They have, was it 10% of the budget?
I'm not sure what percentage.
I think they're looking at an operating levy, aren't they?
Yeah, but I don't think that, if you had a vote on it, it would never pass or not. But can't the school board can increase the levy by a certain percent and not call out for an election on it. There is that passed.
I'm sorry that I don't have that exactly. And I don't want to misquote you, so.
I believe that's true, though. If they can raise it a certain amount without
Without going to a referendum.
right.
Yeah.
And I would assume that, every school district would do that.
A lot of it, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of it though, when we do get to vote, it's like a one-day bonding, that's a different issue
Right.
than the levy. I believe they can do that.
I just struggle with, you see the, whatever, they pass teachers' contracts, or whatever, they pass it, and then, the superintendent come out and say, well, we're 1.2 minutes short, but that has nothing to do with the salary. It's all with the unfunded mandates, but that's not true, I know that's not 100%.
Well, part of Foley's problem is a couple different things, is enrollment's down, and probably state funding hasn't matched inflation, so you get this double-edged sword.
It's part of that, yes.
Yeah, so it's all kind of part of the mix. School finance is pretty complex.
Yeah, it
But
is.
basically, you get down to enrollment, if your enrollment's down.
Oh, yes.
Foley's at what, $7,300 a head? So
A lot of our-
students.
A lot of our school districts are struggling with that, and then to make matters even worse, amidst that challenge, the state legislature says, here is the largest increase in education spending that the state has ever seen. $5 billion into education. But the mandates, the 65 mandates that they passed on, in addition to the $5 billion, literally the weight and the cost of the mandates on the local schools are literally more money than the $5 billion. And so, in Foley and in communities across the whole state, it means that there's literally less teachers in the classrooms, that school districts have to increase the number of kids per teacher, and there's less educational programming, and they're not going to be focused on the right things to close the achievement gap or the lack of reading literacy that exists. Because earned sick and safe time and paid family medical leave are such huge weights on the budget of the school that it makes it untenable to implement the rest of the budget. It's not just schools. I mean, I know you guys deal with that too at the county level, but like literally, that is the huge elephant in the room, are those two things. Which is, well, so one way, and so this is what I've been fighting for. So I am the chief author of the bill to essentially fix the earned sick and safe time law. And one thing that I really don't understand is why are we paying for the people who come in as substitutes, whether they're coming in to fill in for a janitorial staff or for substitute teaching, but they're not necessarily an employee, they're just a substitute. Why are they earning earned sick and safe time when if they don't want to work on Tuesday morning, they can just say, I'm not going to work today. Like, why are we paying the unemployment benefits or the earned sick and safe time benefits or the future paid family medical leave benefits to the people who aren't doing that? Like, literally, that is the thing that ties the hands of school districts and keeps them from being able to properly pay. I mean, and then on the READ Act, that's one of the other big mandates. And if you talk to the school administrators in Foley, they want to teach, they want to help prepare their teachers to go through and get the curriculum training for the READ Act. But the timeline to do so means that they have to hire a whole new slew of teachers just to backfill while their teachers are out learning. And so the way that the legislation is written and the decision making that it's forcing the administrators into is literally just hampering the school districts and blowing the costs out of proportion. So I'm not trying to be hyperbolic or make this seem like it's worse than it is, but like this, it's a crisis situation. And it's not just happening in Foley. It's school districts across the state are dealing with these same challenges of these big time mandates.
And I know the sick and safe time, there's a lot of established businesses that you have sick time already paid.
Exactly. So let's take the schools again. So the schools have a negotiated contract with their teachers. The way that earned sick and safe time is currently written means that literally this adds on to the negotiated contract with the teachers union, and it balloons it out of control. And instead of taking a perspective of, hey teachers and school, let's just let's live out the remainder of this negotiate a contract, and then the next contract will include that. Instead of taking that tack, no, it's logged on immediately, adding that much more cost to the school district.
Can you update us on the wolf population control
I
issue?
love it. Thank you for writing your story on that topic. Yep, so wolves is obviously a really big topic in our area, and it is statewide. So the general conversation, number one, we want to get to a place where we're properly managing our wolf population and that the wolf hunt is part of that solution. Because the wolves are currently on the endangered species list, that limits and ties the hands of our local DNR to appropriately and effectively manage the population. That takes federal action in order to do that. So my ask for all of you is when Senator Klobuchar or Senator Smith come around this area, find their way into that room, and say, please help us delist the wolf. Number one, so start there. Number two, on the state level, we have to hold our state agency, the DNR, more accountable. So we are operating off of the wolves being added to the endangered species list decades ago, almost 5 decades ago already. And at the time, the wolf population had slipped beneath 1,400 wolves. So 1,400 is the number. But now, the DNR has put forward a wolf management plan that says that we won't even consider doing a wolf hunt unless the wolf population is above 3,000. And conveniently, the DNR has measured the wolf population to be at 2,900 and change.
For years.
For years, for years. It's literally been there for about approximately the last 5 years. And then on top of that, when we're measuring the wolf population is only measured and is only surveyed in the 8th Congressional District. So for lack of a better term, it's the whole Northeast, it includes Bemidji, and it heads down to Brainerd, and it comes down to Little Falls. It doesn't reach Foley, and then it stretches across, and it goes to Cambridge, and then it goes that's the general area that they survey the wolf population. I know where I live, and I know here, there are wolves, but they're not being surveyed. But worse than that, a place like Detroit Lakes has wolves galore, and they're not currently surveyed.
And even Roseau up there, the northwest corner.
Same thing, right? Roseau and the southeast part of the state, right? You've got the rolling hills, like as you approach Winona and the bluffs around there. There's wolves there. Are those surveyed? No. And so, my priority to your question, I'm pushing forward a bill that I'm the chief author of to do a statewide survey of the wolf population on an annual basis so that we can get more accurate data. Because it's my belief and the belief of many others that the wolf population actually is likely double or even higher than the 2,900 plus that they currently project. It's probably more like 6,000 or higher. And we have to operate from that amount of data because the livestock and the deer population are impacted by those numbers. Then, to go even further, about a month ago, Wyoming Congresswoman Harriet Hageman came to Minnesota, and she is what I will dub our nation's wolf expert. She is an attorney who is involved in establishing the standards for proper wolf management in the state of Wyoming. And she has worked on it for decades, and she was successful. They have successfully delisted the gray wolf, and they manage it. They manage it with a hunt, and they designate portions of the state to be more of a wolf area, more of a livestock area, and they manage the populations properly. And they get to the very minutia of like single digits worth of wolves as to managing the exact numbers of population. And they all base it based upon the original facts and science and the original endangered species list. Our DNR has gotten so far away from the true facts and the science and the data that was driven by the original endangered species list, listing of the gray wolf in Minnesota, that all of our decision making is just based upon politics of the moment. And that's frustrating for all of us. Now, the thing that we don't fully control ourselves is that they see the gray wolf population tied to our neighboring states. They tie them to the Great Lakes wolf population. So in essence, as we, in the future, work on proper management of the wolf population, we also need to do our best to have coordination with Wisconsin and Michigan too, to properly manage the population, because wolves will travel, like, I think it's somewhere like up to 400 miles themselves, and they travel great distances. And so we need to also work on the coordination between the Great Lakes states to properly manage that. Because what ended up happening, and a reason why this has become such a political football, is states have taken their own tactic on it, and it has drastically changed the wolf population in that area. So a decade ago, Minnesota had a wolf hunt, and at that time, obviously a number of wolves were killed, but that only happened in basically a 1 or a 2 year span. Well, that same thing happened in Wisconsin here like a year ago, and they killed a number of wolves. And so then the people who are against proper wolf management, then they raise their dander and say, oh, all you all want to do is just kill wolves and wipe them off the face of the planet, which isn't our goal. Our goal is proper wildlife management of all species, from wolves to deer to livestock and everything in between, that they're not falling out of balance. And it's the role of the DNR to do that. So there was my long answer to your question, but.
And to have an influence in the economy with an extra license.
Yeah, that too, right? So the frustration is that deer hunters today are now considering not buying deer licenses this year, and not specifically in our area, but everywhere north of our area. So Brainerd Lakes and north, there are people who are saying, we've hunted all of our lives, but we're not going to buy licenses this year because there's no deer up north, and there's no deer up north because they haven't managed the wolf population. Sorry, I get a little bit loud.
One more thing, what about all the state-owned land, the land values are so high, about getting rid of some of that and getting it back on tax rolls? I mean, there's so much land that the state owns and the people are looking, and it's so expensive to say, we can go and populate whatever, some of these outlying areas, but nothing ever happens, or they want to buy more, it seems, all the time.
So I would be generally in agreement with your principle, but know that there's a lot of people who don't like that idea. I haven't been in those rooms to hear those voices yet, but there's a lot of people who suggest that as it relates to the public lands, the state lands, or even federal lands, that those should remain open for public use, for sportsmen, for people who enjoy the outdoors. One of the challenges, and maybe it's just where the spaces are, in much of rural Minnesota, I would say that we would like to see more development of some of those spaces, more places for homes, more places for people to have rural living like we do. And at the same time, in communities near the metro, one of the things that's happening is that people love access to parks and forests, and they try and get that as close to the Twin Cities as possible. And so I'm going to give you one example that's crossed my desk here in the last year. So the DNR has sought to almost stop the foraging of mushrooms. And why? Because a whole bunch of people who forage for mushrooms, who live in the Twin Cities, are basically going to all of the state parks that are the first ring around the metro. And so much so that the trails to where you would find a mushroom are all bad now, right? And so all the same mushroom foragers are going to the same dead tree, right? And so it's almost like it's difficult because we have to balance, how do we help those people who want access to the state land that we have, and make sure that it's close enough to them that they access it, while also understanding a place like, Cass Lake, nobody goes to visit, or wherever, right? People favorite destination, far northwest, or whatever. A lot of Cass County, I guess, to be real honest, where nobody lives there, right? And that people could enjoy living there. They could enjoy a lot of the rural amenities that we all enjoy. So that's a tricky one. It is. And if you come up with great ideas for it, let me know.
Well, I know when the golf course closes in Metro area, they just make that a state park rather than building houses on it. There's a lot more outland there.
Golf courses in the metro is its own beast of politics on its own. Because those conversations do happen.
So to piggyback on that, the bill that we talked about, restricting cities on ordinances for multifamily housing, did that
Good news.
Okay.
No, it has not passed.
Okay.
And it has not passed, and it has basically been announced as dead for this session. So, and so to help fill in the rest of the details for you all, there was a bill moving into the legislature related to housing. Our state faces a housing shortage in every space of all different kinds of housing, from low income to way further up the scale. But the premise of the bill would have been to allow for developers to have a whole lot more direct authority to build without the approval of local jurisdictions like the city. And every local city and county and planning and zoning boards and commissions, and this would have essentially superseded that and allowed for the build out of a lot of these things into multifamily housing or apartment complexes. And it would have superseded a lot of local control. So I didn't support it, and the bill appears to be dead at this stage.
So with that, what's the future look like, Minnesota being a sanctuary state?
Thanks for asking. So the sanctuary state bill was put forward as one of their big priorities this year, especially supported by legislators who live within 494, 694 inside the metro. But the moment you step foot outside those boundaries, the concerns from rural Minnesotans and even the people in the suburbs are like, no, we cannot be doing this. But the fact of the matter remains that while Democrats have had the complete trifecta in St. Paul, they have pushed forward an agenda that benefits people who are here illegally. They gave them driver's licenses, they gave them free health care. They provided for a grant program for $7 million to help people who are here illegally become legal and to take the jobs of Minnesotans. And they have a bill for universal basic income for people who are here illegally, who specifically live in Minneapolis, that they would be given $500 a month just for living in Minneapolis. And that's the general direction that they want to take us. And they're on a path, and they have made Minnesota a top 5 destination nationwide for illegal immigrants. I said this in Royalton, but this is one of the most crazy things. New York City has become so inundated by people becoming illegally or being sent to the city of New York, that the mayor of the city of New York said, I will buy your bus tickets or your plane tickets, and I will fly you to Minnesota or other states like Minnesota, because we physically cannot house you. We physically cannot Chicago's doing the exact same thing. There you go. So literally, they're trying to make Minnesota that next destination. And so making a sanctuary state is that next agenda item. It's not going to move forward this year, but be very clear. If Republicans don't take control of the Minnesota House this fall, it will be one of the top things that's passed next year in the first month of the legislative session. You remember how last year they passed 2 extreme things. They passed the blackout bill, that bill for 100% clean energy by 2040 in the first month, and they passed abortion on demand for any reason, at any time, up until the moment of birth. Those were their top 2 priorities this last year. And if Republicans don't win the majority in the Minnesota House, it's going to be sanctuary state on day 1. That's a top priority for them.
Can you stop that? I mean,
Well, we stop it by winning the elections, right? I mean, it's not going to happen this year, but it's about winning elections.
We know that outstate, you look at the maps, it's all right. Or blue dots, basically, and blue dots have all the people. So you just said that the Republicans or us or whatever have to work about getting that's first ring or second ring of suburbs all back to Republicans somehow. We need to, whatever we have to
Yeah.
You know, you
So
have
this
more
is-
control over
right.
it than we do.
I mean, you saw my speech last week on this
Yeah.
topic. Like, Democrats will not answer the question. I asked the question last week, right?
22 grand for women.
It was hilarious, right? I asked the question. I said, what amount of taxpayer dollars should be spent on people here illegally? They can't answer that question. And they know what a political loser it is for them. Minnesotans are hurting right now. Americans are hurting right now. I've been using this I caught a school board member in the parking lot yesterday, and we just said, like, middle class families. And I'm going to use the upper end of middle class and fully, and I'm going to say families who have 2-income households and are making between $75,000 and $150,000 a year. Those families don't have the money to pay for the inflation that we've seen on gas, on groceries, on energy, on healthcare, on housing. Like, times are not good. Times are not good. And we can't be spending money on stuff that we can't afford. And number two, just like, can we just have a little bit of support Minnesotans first? Take care of our own people? In Minneapolis and St. Paul and all of Hennepin County today, the social services of the county has been completely drained by these new immigrants, new people who have come to there to take advantage of their housing in Hennepin County. You can look this up. This is straight out of the news reports. Hennepin County, they have 5 times the amount of immigrants than they have capacity for housing, for transitionary housing. The Twin Cities food shelves across the entirety of the Twin Cities, but especially in Hennepin County, for the last 5 years have seen 20 and 30% increases every single year for the demand on their food shelves. We're not doing well. We're not doing well. This is not an economy that's sustainable. And Minnesotans are hurting from it. I mean, this probably sounds a little bit extreme, but like for my wife and I, like, we have a baby coming in July, and I'm wearing the same pair of jeans I've been wearing for 2 years, right? And it's just like, it's $40 that I just don't want to spend, or $80 that is just like, these are simple basic things that people in our community are dealing with. And it's because of poor decision making and no ability in St. Paul to say no. Like, what happened when we had a $20 billion budget surplus was every single interest group on the political left came to the legislature and said, I demand 10 million, I demand 100 million, I demand 500 million. And what did they all got it. They gave it all away. They gave the whole thing away. And we have nothing to show for it. Our state is not better off.
We gotta keep it right. Not better.
Like, I gave this example. So there's a bill next week, or in the labor omnibus bill, that is $9 million to renovate one former YWCA facility in South Minneapolis and to create a job center in Hollywood. $9 million. $9 million is more money than was given to any government entity in the way of local government aid or county program aid in all of Mille Lacs County. One building in Minneapolis is getting $9 million, and the whole of Mille Lacs County is getting less than that.
And that's more money than we got in our PSA.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? So, right? Like, what are these decisions, that are happening?
You follow them, and especially, Hennepin County, in the city of Minneapolis, they absolutely don't believe they're doing anything wrong. It's
So-
like,
So good point. So I've had some people move into our district just north of Royalton, and I went out for lunch with them at Jordy's, and we were talking about, and they had lived on just the south side of Minneapolis for a number of years during their professional career, came and retired up here, great conservative people. And I said, well, I just like wrestle with this. Like, how should we deal with this? How should we deal with this desire by Minneapolis and St. Paul to be a sanctuary city, to be a sanctuary county or whatever? And they said, just let them. Let them be a sanctuary city. Let them be a sanctuary county and be happy that we don't have to deal with it up here. Stop it from becoming a sanctuary state, but allow them to live the life that they want to live. Just say, that's yours, you deal with it. We're not, let those county taxpayers, those city taxpayers pay the price of those decisions, rather than forcing the rest of us to make these decisions, or to bear the brunt of the cost of it. That's one way.
That'll just snowball.
What's that?
It'll just snowball. It'll be the cities first, and then they'll be big enough where they've got so many votes and so much power that it'll just continue to expand.
State will keep funding it.
Yep.
So there's one example where this has been successful. So
New York.
no, in Minnesota actually, there's a recent example that we have of a way where we have stopped state funding of a project and said we're not going to fund this project and it should be on local taxpayers. And that example is the Southwest Light Rail. That project was projected to be about $2 billion. It's probably much north of that, in the $3 billion or more range. Back when Republicans last had the majority in the House, a bill was passed and signed by the governor that no state funding could be used to build that train. And so now it's Hennepin County. Now Hennepin County has to pay the cost of that train. You and I are going to use that train, and we're not going to pay for it. They're still building it, and they're still going to have to pay for it. So to me, that's maybe a moment where I'm like, okay, maybe there is a future for us to say we can control that sort of decision. So as it relates to a sanctuary state, if you want to be a sanctuary county, Hennepin County, knock yourself out. Be our guest, but you are not going to make this state a sanctuary state, and we are not going to continue to fund people coming here illegally.
One more, sports betting.
Your favorite subject?
I'm just intrigued by it, that's
It
all.
is.
I don't have the money to get it, but it's a hot topic.
Yeah. So it's a hot topic. So I'm going to try and set the stage and then kind of give you where things are at. So sports betting has been it's a gray area in state law currently. You cannot currently place a bet on whether or not the Vikings will win or how much they'll win by. That's not legal. Or I should say that's kind of currently specifically illegal. However, you can bet on how players are going to do in that game. You can place bets on, the Timberwolves point guard is going to score X amount of points. You can do that, and it's a gray area in law. So the sports betting, as it's moving forward, has a lot of dynamics, and the current dynamics are that the Native American tribes in Minnesota are trying to say only we, the Native American tribes, should have access to the dollars that are generated by sports betting. Then the two racetracks that we have in Minnesota, Running Aces and Canterbury Park, both are like, oh no, you can't do that. If we aren't getting a slice of the pie, we would never support that, and that would be the demise of our business model, and it would directly impact whether or not we can be competitive in the marketplace today. Then on top of that, obviously the state is going to generate some level of revenue, but at the same time, as a state allows for more gambling, you also have to grapple with people being addicted to gambling and the services that you need to provide to help support people who have that addiction, or to have the preventative measures in place on the preventative measures or the recovery systems and services that are needed. So you have to pay for those things. And the dynamics of that are very interesting. So there are Democrats at the Capitol who are absolutely opposed to the expansion of gambling. There's a few of them that are opposed to the expansion because they worry about people getting addicted. There's a handful of them that would vote for any form or version of more gambling. And so in order for sports betting to pass, it has to have Republican support. And Republicans, by and large, will say, we will never create a monopoly for the Native American tribes. And instead, it has to include any solution in sports gambling, must include support for the tracks. And so those dynamics play themselves out. And then the one additional thing that you and I talked about when you were down was that they added on top of that an additional tax cut for local charities to the tune of, I think it's $40 million tax cut, which for local charities like the local American Legion or the Rice Sportsman's Club would be a very significant tax cut for them, and it would basically outperform e-poll tabs. And so those are all the dynamics, and they're trying to shove it through all in one bill. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't cut across, or it cuts across party lines, and you have to build this weird coalition to make it happen. But I guess I'd like to pull this room a little bit and kind of get your perspective on if you would like to see legal sports gambling.
Me, yes, I know Wisconsin.
Okay?
I mean, different about that.
Entirely indifferent?
Yeah.
Wow.
With price.
Entirely indifferent.
Are you an annual trip to Iowa?
Only one though.
Just once a year?
Okay.
I'd like to see it here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I would like to see gambling, but not limited to the tribe.
Yeah. That's good. So I fall in line with his perspective. For me, like, I love sports. I love football specifically. I'm a huge Vikings fan. And I do fantasy football. I do those things, and I do the things that are currently allowed under law. And I don't personally have a problem if someone wants to place a bet on the actual game. I don't know that it's all that much different. So a bunch of my colleagues travel to Iowa on pretty frequent occasion, honestly, to place their bets. And it's like, so are we missing out on that and that revenue? But I, for one, I don't think that in my elected service that I would ever vote to create a monopoly.
Right, I'm against that too.
So,
I'm like you, I bet on football, the NFL football, like 15 weeks.
If you're gonna get into addiction stuff, it sounds like one more county human services mandate that's gonna be unfunded for us to take care of.
So you're like, yippee!
So, what's the argument to people that, are looking at it from the perspective of addiction and, expanding gambling, but they're more than happy to have the Powerball and Mega Millions and, in order to pay out the $100 million, $1 billion, that's all taxpayer money going in to fund that, plus what's the administrative costs of all of those dollars, and then a percentage of that gets paid out, split to state and federal taxes. So, ultimately, it's just we the people giving our money to the government, and one person or a few people benefit from it. We have no problem with that from a gambling perspective, but if it's on something that you actually have, there's a little bit of skill involved in it, like cards, that is expanding and that's addictive, but just throwing $2 at the gas station is fine. How do people
Wrestle with that?
wrestle with that? Yeah.
I don't know that they truly do. I don't think that they think
They don't
about
see it as
it.
apples and apples.
No, I don't think so. Scott, do you have more thoughts on that? Generally, and maybe I need to spend more time with the data and with the facts on this. I don't know that people actively think about that.
I've tried to find online, what's the administrative percentage, the cost of running the Powerball, and I can't find it.
Now keep in mind that Powerball and a few of the others, those benefit the outdoors, right? A ton of that money goes
Sure.
to rehabilitation of the environment and other things like that. The Environment Natural Resources Trust Fund is where a lot of that money goes to. So, Minnesotans are seeing that back
Sure.
to them, right?
But there's the income tax aspect of it. when it's won in the state.
Yeah, that too, right? You'd far rather win in another state rather than Minnesota, right, in terms of the income taxes. So, I mean, frankly, I'd love to get more input, so if you learn more, please share it with me.
It seems like it'd be something that you should be able to find online of, you know, for every $1,000 that gets put in the Powerball, you know, what does the winner actually end up with?
Yeah.
But
It's probably half or less.
Or less, yeah.
Half or less, right? I mean, I know for the less than a handful of Powerballs I've ever bought, I've always waited until it's gotten above $1 billion. You don't want 500,000. I really wouldn't want.
You're hoping somebody else wins it so that you don't waste $2 the next day.
So, but anyways, these are fun conversations to have. I really enjoy it. I think we had the same conversation back in Royalton, and I appreciate that you guys came and spent an hour or whatever of your time. Thanks for hosting us. Thanks for coming and covering this. But this is about just having an engaged community about the things that are happening in St. Paul. So I applaud you for all of the watching of the legislature that you do.
It'll be interesting tomorrow, huh? When you're on there. We'll see what happens.
Right. It'll be very interesting. So the only other thing to mention on that topic about the senator who broke the law is the legislative leaders. So the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, and the 2 Republican leaders, they all went out for dinner tonight. And I think that this was the key point of the conversation.
they're trying to go, holy crap, what are we going to do tomorrow?
Exactly. How is this going to play itself out? And I think that we're all going to get to be front row seats to that. So,
Yeah, I think, was it today? I think there was supposed to be a couple, today or tomorrow, maybe a couple of Democratic press conferences on something totally different, but
it'll get run.
they canceled it because they knew it would never come to talking about that at all. They canceled it. I know some of the radio guys are like, well, you should just be there and tell the truth, tell what you feel. And I know how, you know too, it's 34 to 33 and how tight. It's like they come up with a perfect bill all the time because you try to put amendment that's 34, 33, 34.
They'll just
You
keep
know, in the
going
House
on
at 69, it's just, it's like no matter what, it's like, what? But you give them credit, I guess, they're tight. I don't know how it works down there, how they can be so disciplined, because some of these are sensible amendments by far, we think in a way, it's like, no, not gonna do that. I don't know how it works behind the curtains or whatever.
Neither do I.